So let's continue with another custom figure, this time with Shriek from the Batman Beyond series. This is obviously the one from the comic book, not the one from the animation. Nevertheless, it is still a really fun figure to work on. By the way, I've already sold the arms out of this set. I only needed the figure. So this is the only time you're going to be able to get your figure wet in hot water to pull it apart. I recommend dry heat. Make sure you heat it up and pull the figure apart because we're going to be getting into each and one of these units to be able to wire it correctly. So if you notice those blue orbs on the head, on the torso, and on the hand, well, they all come apart. Let me show you. Make sure you pull the wrist peg out of the hand as we're going to drill in from that hole into the hand. It's very soft plastic. Once you remove that orb, don't remove the armor off of the front. There's glue at the top and bottom. We'll get to that later. So I ended up not using the rotary blinking lights. I used something else. This was just a test I did. A manual hand drill like this is going to be essential for this because you don't want to melt the plastic with a Dremel. You want to go very slow, control the amount of drilling that you're doing. You just want to have a nice clean perforation into the plastic. This is a very soft plastic on the body. The only place that the plastic is actually really hard is on the joints, like the elbows. We'll get to that in a moment. Now if you have to, you can remove that peg that's inside the head to make it easier for you to work on. Just want to make sure that the drill that you're using makes a nice clean cut or perforation into the plastic. So on both ends, make sure it's clean so that the connector on the LED wire can pass through without any obstruction. So I'm using a white LED. I wanted a contrast between the colors that I'll be using on the other orbs. As you can see, the wire is already prefabricated. It has the connectors ready to go. It is a very thin and very delicate wire, so make sure that there are no obstructions in the perforation that you've just made. If any doubt, clean it before you wire in the LED. So as you wire in the LED, you want to bend the last end where the actual diode is so that it sits flush with the bottom of the perforation. And then fix it in there, and you can use some glue, or in this case I'm using UV resin, just to hold it in place. Anytime you thread through any of the LEDs and put them in the area you want, make sure you do a test run. So link up to your battery source an external like this that is easy to work with, and make sure that the lights are working. And there we go. We've got the first orb ready to go. Let's move on. Nice, this is looking really good. But we can't leave that wire exposed on the outside. We're gonna have to put it inside the torso somehow, and that's gonna involve this hand drill once again. So we're gonna drill from the top through the neck into the torso. But we'll get to that in just a moment. Let's get the other perforation started that is actually that orb that's in the chest. So we're going to take that hand drill one more time, and we're going to drill into the chest. Now I went too deep into it. You only need to perforate it about 1/4 inch and then drill up from the bottom to meet up with that first perforation. So once you perforate the chest here, about 1/4 inch, and you'll feel it when it goes through, it'll lighten up, you won't have any tension. Again, you can see how soft that plastic is. Then you drill up from the bottom inside the torso to meet up with that perforation. Now you're all set. Now you drill in from the bottom to meet up, and that's what it should look like. It shouldn't take you very long. Again, it's really, really soft plastic. If you do damage that ring, that gray ring, just repaint it. It's no big deal. But coming in from the top of the neck into the torso, and coming out here into the bottom of the torso is where we want to end up. And as you can see, I've already done that ahead of time. That drill bit should go right through without any problem. Make sure you clean it out so that there's no obstruction for that lead to go in there. So once you've cleaned out the passage for the wire, you should be able to thread it through without any trouble. If you do come across an obstacle, you'll have to clean it out again and make sure that it's a nice clean pass for that connector. Fish out the connector on the bottom and then thread the entire wire all the way through until you get to the pin. Now you can see here that it hides pretty well. Now if you look at the pin that's going to go into the neck, it has these small rivets or they could be called divots that are on the end. That is going to prevent it from crushing the wire, but still allowing it to go through and having power coming through the wire. Make sure you have enough slack for you to have movement in the head. In this case, I had a little too much here because I wasn't finalizing that connection yet. But it's probably going to be maybe a 1/4 inch or maybe 3/4 of an inch of slack that you want to give it. And once again, test out the light. Make sure that it is not kinked, it's not bent somewhere, that it's cutting the power to the actual LED. Once you've got that ready to go, you're set to move on to the next step, and that's going to be wiring the chest. So once again, make sure it's a clean pass. Thread the LED through, bend the end so you can put it into the chest. Here I'm testing out that rotary LED again, and it actually didn't work because it cancels out the effect when I put it into the other board. On this board, because it's a continuous light, it will give me a rotating light, but it's too big to fit with the orb on top of it, so I had to change it out. I could have drilled out the orb, but once again, the board that I want to use is going to cancel out the rotation on this LED, so I had to go with a different one. For now, I'm just testing it out, but yes, it's the same process. Thread it through with the LED you want and then fix it into that position. Getting back to the hands, you're going to take that manual drill, take out the peg in the hand, and very carefully drill through into the cavity that's in the wrist. It's going to take you very little effort. It's very soft plastic. Repeat the process for the other hand. made it to installing the board, the effects board that we want on the back. And that's going to be up to you which one you want. I chose this one because it has 3 different effects. Now we do have to lift up the armor in the back. We've got glue on the 2 ends, so be very careful. You're going to have to carve out the center, and yes, also that peg in the center that holds the armor. Carve that out. You're going to have to lower it enough for the board to sit flush, as if the armor was covering that. So you're going to have to take your time with your X-Acto knife and a file, make it square and flush so that it sits inside the back. That way when the armor comes back down, it stays flush. We're going to glue this down with some E6000, and once this is setting or curing, it's going to take a few hours for it to truly set correctly. I'm just going to leave it overnight. If you want to just leave it a couple hours to continue working, that's great, but you're risking the chance that it could move on you as you're working on it. So make sure it's fully cured before you continue working. Make sure that there's no glue that goes onto the electronics, only the back of the board. Great, so now this board is fully dry. Now we've got to connect the wires from the arms that are going to come through here. As you can see, we're going to have to come through the arm area, the arm socket. And then we're going to have to cut out a hole for that selector switch so that the armor can sit around that and come down flush over the rest of the back. So with a fine tip pin, we're going to mark where we're going to start our first cut, and we're going to make just a U shape and a square, and then cut selectively. Do not cut the entire slot because you may overcut or undercut. So make a small incision at the top and then make a U by making an incision on the left and right, and then pull it back over the selection switch to see if you are correct. And if you are, then you can continue cutting down from there. You can lay the armor over the top of the selector switch and use the selector switch as a margin or a ruler to guide yourself in cutting the rest of the opening. So take your time when cutting the armor for the selector switch if you've got one on your board, because once you cut it, there's no turning back. This is a one-time shot. You want to make sure that it is precise and that it is going to cover it nice and neat so that it looks factory made when you're finished. So because this is going to be seen, it's going to be on the exterior, then neatness really does count. And this is where a nice new blade is going to be to your benefit to have on your X-Acto knife. If not, you're going to have a very unattractive opening on the back, and you're just not going to want to show the figure. So be very careful, take your time. This is going to make a significant difference in the appearance of your figure. So just a quick reminder, once you get your armor entirely configured to the switch that you're working on, or if you don't have one, it's just going to be easier, don't glue down the armor yet. And remember, we're only going to be gluing it at the bottom and on the side. You don't want to glue it down yet because you want to make sure your power source is going to be connected, or I should say your lead to the connecting board. So you want to make sure that your USB or your battery wire is installed first. Then you can glue it down. In the meanwhile, you can still run a test. Make sure your board is working. And be careful with those connectors when you are testing it, pulling them out and reconnecting them, because you can bend those wires. This is the board that I used. It is from lightmybricks.com. And once again, there's that connector. I almost blew it on that one. I ended up bending one of the pins. How I did it, I don't know. The only thing is I'm glad that I fixed it. And I've got my wire now hooked in there. I'm waiting for my USB to come in, and once that comes in the mail, I'll have that installed. So I still can do other things before sealing this down, and that's going to be to wire the connecting LEDs from the arms. Let's get moving on to that section. Alright, we made it to the arms, and we're gonna have to move those pins out and then drill into the elbow. The elbow, however, is not the same plastic. It is a very, very hard plastic, so you will have to use your Dremel for that. So heat up the arms, pull out these pegs. They're flat on one side, right on the other. It doesn't take very much heat. Once again, use dry heat from a hair dryer. Do not get them wet. You're going to be running wires to here. Drill at an angle so that it comes up just at the point where the elbow starts to bend. And you'll have to do that on the opposite side. And yes, you will have to remove that ball joint for you to do that. Repeat the same process on the other arm. Make sure you make a test by using a wire and threading it through. Make sure it is a clean pass. That way you can clean up anything else before you actually install the correct wire. At this point, I don't have all my wires delivered to me yet. I am waiting for the blue ones to show up. I have all the other colors except the blue ones. So in the meantime, I will be making sure that the other arm also has a nice clean perforation on both sections of the arm. Okay, so we're now down to the difficult part, and drilling that elbow. That was actually really tricky. I had to put it into a vise to hold it still enough for me to use the Dremel. Using a hand drill here, it didn't do any effect. So this is the only time that the Dremel is actually going to be in use. So once the elbow is finally drilled through, we're still not done yet. That's for the wire to sit in and have some slack to move. We still need to provide a slot to put the wire in because the connector's not going to go through that. It's too small. And if we drill a large hole, we're going to weaken the joint. So we're going to have to make a cut through the actual elbow from the top. I don't have a rotary tool that is thin enough to do it. We're going to have to use something else. And then of course we have to drill the hole underneath this guard for the wire to come through. And if you look, the guard doesn't actually sit all the way to the actual socket. It doesn't say flush. It is on the bottom, but there's a gap. So it's going to be perfect because it's going to leave a space for the wire to go through without being pinched and directly into the torso cavity. It's going to be awesome. This is really, really going to look good. So let's go on to getting the other portion drilled out that we need. And actually, it's not drilled. We're going to have to use a hand saw to do that. Here I'm just marking the areas where I want those perforations to come through. I thought about the side here, but it's going to be unsightly. I don't want that. I might have to glue this back down. It's just going to be easier if I actually go right into the torso cavity, and that's what I ended up doing. For video purposes, I've already done this. So I'm just going to show you what I used, which is this fancy cutting tool right here. And it's thin enough that it provides a very, very thin slot after it's cut. I'm just matching up the two ends of the hole that I already pre-drilled out with my Dremel. Again, I've already done this earlier, so it doesn't take that much longer on video. But that's what I did, and that's where I'm going to run my wires. So now we're going to fix the LED inside the head. We're just going to take a little bit of the UV resin and apply it just to the edges. We don't want to have a whole drop in there simply because we don't want to take up space that the orb won't be able to sit correctly and flush to the rest of the helmet. So it's just a very tiny amount so that it stays in place. And then we'll hit it with the UV light for it to cure. Because it's a very thin layer, it's not going to take very long for it to cure and harden and fix the LED in place. And then of course we'll do that on the inside of the helmet. And then of course, once you've glued it inside or have tacked it down with the UV, take a bit of that slack and then tack it to the wall of the helmet so that if anything happens, such as any tugging and pulling while you're posing your figure, it doesn't pull on the actual connectors from the LED diode. That way you don't risk ruining the lighting in your figure, and this way it allows you to have some slack in the head or the helmet so that they can move when you are positioning it. And once that is there and it's ready, attach that orb. Nice. Now let's test out the lighting one more time because that's going to be important. If it doesn't light up, something went wrong. We made it to the end here. Well, just about the end. We're going to perforate from the bottom of the shoulder cavity into the torso. That's it. And remember, do not glue the wires into the torso because you want some slack for those wires to move as you make your poses. Repeat that on the opposite side. Then you'll have to reattach your arms very carefully back into the slot. I wasn't able to show it on here because the camera can't get in there, but you need to put the wire through the other half of the arm and slot it into the elbows. I'll show you in just a minute. This is already dry. I had to leave the armor drying overnight because I glued it down, and the only wire that you see coming out is the one from the USB connection that I've got, so that worked out really well. Then the other two wires that you see are from the arm, and that's coming right from the bottom where I perforated, and it goes right through the cavity, and there is no pinching from the the ball joints. Once you heat them up with your hairdryer and pop them back into the arm, then you can snap the arm back into just like anything else that you've taken apart, and then thread the rest of the wire through into the torso and compact it into the upper part of the torso. Heat up the bottom part of the torso with the hairdryer and pop it back in. It will work just fine. I wasn't able to show all that. This video would be extensively long. Here you can see the elbows where I ran the wires. Now if you are finicky about this, you can use your putty and cover those up. I prefer to have them just loose like this because I want that slack to come through and be able to allow positioning for those elbows. If I put the putty in there and cover it, you're risking the movement of that wire and you could snap it and then you've got more problems. So it's all up to you. If you like this video or the ideas in here and the methods are going to help you, awesome. Please give it a like and please share it. And of course, comment. If there's any questions, something that you had a doubt in that you didn't see here, put that in the comments. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of the video. And don't forget to keep customizing.